Mr. Chairman, guests, ladies and gentlemen, one of those awful things in my position, I'm here addressing a huge and distinguished audience, not one of whom has come for the purpose of listening to me. And in those circumstances, it's very nice to find a quote which is appropriate. And I'm very lucky to have found one which couldn't be more apposite. Francis Bacon, writing in Advancement of Learning, and if there's anything we're here to do this evening, it must be for the advancement of all our learning, wrote, "A man must make his opportunity as oft as find it." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you and I are here this fine spring evening. When we heard that Michael Graves was to be visiting this country, we thought it simply too good an opportunity for us to miss. And so we had the idea to ask him to deliver a lecture to such an audience as this in London. When we approached the RIBA with our thoughts, they responded with immense enthusiasm. In fact, such enthusiasm that they suggested that the lecture should be held here in their magnificent, if somewhat intimidating, headquarters. We were therefore particularly delighted when Michael Graves accepted our invitation. There are few architects who are so well known and I suppose few as influential as he on the international stage. It's a great privilege for us, and it actually is a great thrill to us to be involved and instrumental in arranging that he be here this evening in person. But our pleasure has been much enhanced by your own magnificent response, not only you down here, but there are a fine collection of people up in a room upstairs, and it's a magnificent response. It's actually led me to wonder whether perhaps we ought to be suggesting to the RIBA that this might be an annual event. Well, that's perhaps something which in due course you'll let us know what your feelings are. But it does mean that my own task this evening is one that I can approach with the greatest of pleasure. My task is, on behalf of all my colleagues in Redland Roof Towers and in Redland Bricks, to thank you, all of you, for being here this evening. Thank you.
I'd like to add that the idea was not only from Redland Bricks, but also from David Pearce, the former editor of the RIBA journal, The Architect. I would imagine that mostly you're here because you know who Michael Graves is. I therefore will say no more, but ask him to take the lectern. Michael.
Thank you, Derek. I like it. It works. Derek Dunster. It's terrific. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about a dozen seats for those lovely people upstairs who are watching a lecture by Peter Eisenman. And if they want to see the good stuff, they'll have to come down here. But there are 2 seats. Now, maybe there are people outside, and I should stay out of this. But anyway, I hate to see them go wanting. And I want somebody to sit in front of Derek so he can't see it. David Dunster called me 6 months ago or so and said, "Would you like to come talk?" And I said no. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I had just been there. And the last time I talked here, there were a group of people from the assessment committee of the National Gallery who were in the audience, and from that point on, I was off the list." So I have less to lose tonight. There are no clients here. But when he said, well, we'd like to see the new scheme for the Whitney, why don't you just talk about the Whitney? And so I thought that was intriguing. But I put the Whitney lecture together, and it wasn't quite an hour, so I brought 24 other projects. Well, not quite. I only brought museums because some of you did see the talk or hear the talk a year and a half, 2 years ago, whenever it was. Disastrous afternoon. It's a terrific talk, too. But I thought I would try to elaborate some of the problems of the Whitney, though they're probably not too appropriate for some of the things that concern you in this town because of its horizontality, where in New York, where we have this silly vertical town, it's much harder to build in a situation which is as volatile as this in terms of what you have gone through in the recent past in the National Gallery. Not the new scheme, I can say that because I haven't seen it, the new scheme. But I know what preceded it. So perhaps we'll start with the first. I do this, I know. This is really marvelous. That, this will probably work because it wasn't made by British Leyland, or I had a lot of English cars. Okay. Now, it's perhaps corny to start with the slide on the left, but one can't resist, because in a curious way, museums are a new building type. And I show you, of course, the plan for the several plans for the Altus Museum by Schinkel as one of the first museums, but I'll show you Durand's plan for what he calls the first museum in a moment. But look for a moment at the plan and look at the variety that one finds in a building such as this. Clearly, the classical building in its organization and its understanding of the center and its edges and the light and how light might get to the center of the whole organization. But the composition yields, oops, I'm not supposed to do that. This is, oh God, I'm going to do this one now? God, it's German. The front door is here. But that's the great porch that you know that has been painted in an attic style, red base to it, and it's quite marvelous as you see the limestone portico, and then, of course, the several galleries that surround it, and how they provide the kind of anonymous edge to the building where divisions can be made where they need be, and then this great sculpture court that you see in early drawing on the right. And then separate galleries here where one can move from the edge of the building back to galleries such as that. And you can imagine the way this kind of building then might be adapted in time. One of the adaptations occurred at the turn of this century in Brooklyn, New York by McKim, Mead, and White, where they have clearly used not only Schinkel's plan, but Normand's and Durand's as well, to assemble this attitude of centrality that you find in this dome space on the left, and then one of the passages on the right. What I don't have is a picture of one of the great galleries, which would then be described off that linear edge of the building. Many of you know that this was a recent competition in New York, and Arata Izasaki has been given the job of adding to this museum, as only a sixth of it was built. It would have been bigger than the Metropolitan Museum if they had realized the full building, but remember it was in Brooklyn, so not going to happen. Here is the plan by Normand, where a clear adaptation of the Schinkel idea here of centrality, but look now at almost the sense of the bath as he has employed other kinds of attitudes toward the great gallery that you see here, stairs either side, more courts on that side, another stair at that point. The whole thing is a museum about architecture, obviously, but even these sections here are quite enormous rooms in scale. and then Hubert Robert's painting to get after the idea of how light might enter the Louvre before they had cut the skylights into the vault up above, and to see how the top light then gives the ambient sense of light in the room and does not presumably destroy the paintings. One of the buildings that I think has influenced all of us is, of course, the Dulwich Gallery, of John Soane's wonderful gallery in Dulwich. And the ambient light here is a curious one, because as you leave this, I'm sorry, the slide is so awful, but as you leave this this gallery for the first time and try to reconstruct it in your mind, one of the things that occurs to you are these lunettes, and you have almost been teased into the idea that that's where the light comes from, that they are so somehow original in their, not in their placement so much, but in their particularity of form and the way they cut into the structure of the building, that one leaves with the sense that ambient light is coming in part from the depth of the structure, when all along, of course, you see it in the transom up above. In our Soane showroom here in London, finished a year or so ago, that lunette light becomes a way of allowing the showroom to get top light, and then, of course, the clear-story light around the edge, which in part was there, at least there on one side of this furniture gallery, if that's a reach, I'm sorry. But I needed to keep the walls empty of natural light so that we could show all the furniture that needed to be shown in a place like that. What I have done here is to take the one side of the clear story that was available to us in this renovation and add 3 more around that, and they are lit then with incandescent light. So you're fooled a bit about this entire feature of this place. Durand's plan for what he calls the first museum is seen here. And it engages us, I think, because in this simple pattern of the 4 courtyards, the Petrostyle courtyards, if you will, as they become the kind of columns of space of light that allow the symmetry of the plan on the interior courts. But look at the galleries that are here and here, for instance, that repeat, obviously, around the plan. And then look at, if you can see it, it says G here. I don't know what the legend says for G, but another series of galleries that get natural light here, presumably top light there, natural light from the side, but look at the size of those rooms as against the ones adjacent to them, and then the size of the court and the shape of the court, and then the central rotunda, as it gives the legibility of the whole plan as you're in the depths of that plan and knowing how enormous this whole thing would be. That idea of the particularity or singularity of that rotunda then becomes so important to knowing your place within this symmetrical organization. Life is rarely this simple, I suppose, or satisfactory in terms of the kinds of projects that we tend to get nowadays. The one on the right is the project on the right is one of the first museums I had done, and though I'm not going to show you that project, I will show you only the plan to give you the sense of centrality that, on one hand, Durand's plan gives us. That centrality now takes on a new aspect here. There was in Fargo, North Dakota, which is on this side of the Red River of the North, don't you love it? And this side, which is Minnesota, another state, another town called Moorhead, Minnesota, to be a joint project by these two rather small towns where they would build a new arts center. But there are existing buildings here, and the idea was that we would build a new concert hall there and a new ethnic art or museum there, which was mainly for Scandinavian and Indian art on the Moorhead side. But in between, they would share the two towns' art museum. And if you see the Red River on its rather diagonal path, then intersecting the main street of town, the idea here was that we could make a bridge, which was needed as well, for the transportation to continue across Main Street, of course, and then above that build this new gallery, which would be part photography, part painting and sculpture, and a couple of porches here and there that would look then out to the Red River and be a place to meet on that particular path going across. So one is building both a bridge as a museum and the galleries as one takes this certainly it reached to say a cultural belt from over here to there and finally to the concert hall on the other side. But the centrality here and the centrality there are not too dissimilar except for the distortion. And that distortion becomes the whole event, obviously, because there is a central window on that side looking at the river and then a central gallery on the north side, better light, looking north and up the river as you pass through the changing galleries on either side. This is obviously a level above the street. The Duran plan allows me to talk for a moment about the adaptation of the Uffizi into a gallery. You all, I'm sure, know that the Uffizi gets its name from being an office building at one time, before it was a gallery. But what you may not know is that before it was an office building, it was a grand palace, which is here facing the Arno, and there's that palace facade out there on the river. And as you take that central access back into what was once a courtyard in a quite small building, was then extended, as you see it here, with the court giving it the legibility that the rotunda in Duran's plan established. As you know, you enter the Uffizi at this rather awkward corner off the piazza, which is over here, and David is standing about there in front. And then in you go, and along the galleries. You can walk along a light corridor, which is all glass. I don't know whether you can see it here, but it has that kind of character along that edge inside the courtyard. And that's mainly the last time I was there, at least used for small sculpture, and then into the galleries here, and then into secondary galleries there. Obviously, those have all been appropriated as galleries. Now, what interests me is this building goes from house to office and finally to galleries with equal grandeur, in that the kind of light and the kind of room made fit both the domestic life of the Florentines at that time, as well as the light working quite admirably for offices and so on. But what you might take from this is that in the Uffizi, one can make a path. In other words, you can go from here all the way along this inner edge of the court, here, back down through there, end up, I think, at least in the 60s, in a restaurant at the end. You could instead go this way. That's one trip. Second trip might be along this light gallery and into one of these rooms, back out again, back in, back out, etc. Or in an idealized plan, perhaps walls broken apart here, as these are down at that end, so that you could have a second route connecting all of those galleries, or even a third, or seeing these as dead ends off these rather larger galleries here. And you can see the ease of the plan and the variety that's possible with this terribly ragged edge that is out at that outer side, obviously with other buildings crowding up against it, and the sense of top light coming into these galleries at the third level, as well as side light coming in through the edge. You could make a diagram of the Uffizi partie, and in a sense, in perhaps architect parlance, clean it up a bit, and you could have the loop that is so important to understanding museum design, as it is, I think, quite hard in certain museums to find a way to know what, in quotes, you've done and what you haven't done within the gallery. But here, the loop could give you one version on one trip to the end and then back again, a whole different route getting back to go at the front door. And then you find in modern design, in small m, small d, small quote, buildings such as our version of the National Gallery, and this is called the East Wing. Sometime when you're in Washington, D.C., go to the West Wing. It's really a very good building by John Russell Pope. This one is a different kind of thing. The architect said that he designed this building on an airplane after talking to Paul Mellon Paul Mellon in American stands for rich man, in Washington, and decided because the site was triangular that his building would be triangular, and the way he would give the plan energy is to superimpose one triangle over the other, and drew that, I suppose, on the back of an envelope, and then proceeded to win awards. The plan, though, the diagram, well, this slide shows a little cubicle there and one over here and one over there, and those of you who've seen this building know that that is a big void with a tapestry by Miro that hangs down and a hanging sculpture by Calder that hangs in the space. And as we used to say in the 60s, this is a people space. There are lots of people and baby carriages and balloons and ice cream cones in here, in that space, and there you see some potted palms which occupy the place when everybody goes home. But the curators having to show, or getting to show, the installation of the treasure houses of Britain were nonplussed at knowing how to turn or convert this semi-plan into a plan. And so what they did, quite knowingly, is to build a surrogate architecture inside one arm of this organization. So here you have, I guess it's around this corner, here you have the treasure houses of Britain, described as you see it in a series of rooms that take us through the history of British domestic architecture, and have, therefore, one is treating it a bit like the Uffizi now, in that all of this black poche were the adjacent buildings, and we're really acting here like you had real architecture, and it was terrific. It was a great show and a good installation, and then it now has returned to a people space. That's not to suggest that I'm against all that other stuff, but oh well. Here is a museum finished now, I think, 2 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia, and all of this building that we didn't do, but was built in 1915 by a Pittsburgh architect who was asked by Emory University to build a new quadrangle. He built about 6 buildings on this lawn here, and all of them look essentially like that facade. One across the way was remodeled by Paul Rudolph a number of years ago into a new library. But one finds this building made of the shards and leavings of Georgia quarry, and you get this kind of patchwork, almost nostalgic face to the building, quite wonderful in the various patterns that are made in the various colors. Looks like Bath stone here and then Indiana limestone, but it's all Georgia marble. Keeping Hornbostel, the architect's intention intact, and his front door, which is clearly here, and that's the back of the building over there. We were asked to make 2 fire stairs. The only additions to the building is a fire stair here and a fire stair over there. It's the only place I got to go out in the rain. But inside, there's a wonderful stair that takes you up to the 2nd floor. This building had already been remodeled a couple of times before I got there, so little left of the interior. But this side becomes museum, and that side was to become the faculty offices for art history and archaeology. So I'm going to take you in now in here and turn left into the galleries. There is the plan, that's Hornbostel Stair. There's our front door for the galleries. There's a permanent Egyptian collection there, a necessary stair that comes up behind that gallery, a series of smaller galleries here. And as you start to see, the fragments of plans that I have shown you, the plans from history, that give us the variety of room from big to long to small to round, become important to a plan like this because of the particularity that can be engendered by each of these sequences along the route that one might take. These are then the offices on that side, and then the upstairs a drawing gallery and a more flexible space for changing exhibition. This is the left turn into the front door of the Emory Art and Archaeology Gallery. Archaeology here on the first floor. At the end of that axis, then, there's a small rotunda for special new acquisitions and the fire stair that I mentioned before. They had run out of Georgia marble, so ours is stucco. Great 20th century. We need Redlands in America. I'm sure they're there, but not much good. The inside of the Egyptian collection is here with these guys stretched out along the gallery floor. We, in the office, then came back and painted the plan of Ramses II on the floor to give it a little life and decoration, and to start to suggest the scale of undertaking, no pun, sorry, that of putting these big guys and the sarcophagi in this space, as against other plans that we had done in the other galleries, which we'll see in a moment. Hornbostel gives us this idea because he built the School of Architecture at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. There's Mellon again. And that's a marble floor at Carnegie Tech, or Carnegie Mellon now called, where all the plans of the great buildings of the world are on the ground level as one enters. So one finds the Villa Rotunda and St. Peter's and other, St. Paul's, I suppose, engaged in the ground floor in black marble on a white marble floor. Nevertheless, the stair here goes up behind this. There's a little Pope's perch at that point at the landing. Vitrines there, as you see them along that wall. And then we also, in the office, painted these bases as they couldn't afford the marble. This is gypsum board painted to look like something else. Underneath the stair, we were able to show some of the precious things the collection has with pin lights here looking down on it in a dark room and highlighting some of these artifacts which are near and dear to the collection. And then new acquisitions for sculpture in this little rotunda room that takes you up to the second floor stair. In the Greek room, one can't but paint the Acropolis, I suppose. But you start to see the difference between the Parthenon and the Erechtheum over here as against Ramses II. The scale of, for instance, just a column is so enormously different one from the other. We thought it would be instructive to kids seeing that difference as they walk from room to room. The next museum is a museum of oceanography and aquarium in Charleston, South Carolina. If you ever are in the States, Charleston is a charming town made of wonderful sort of sideways houses. All the houses, these are Charleston houses here, have short fronts to the street, long colonnade on either side, verandas, and that's a very cool space then, where the winds, they're all facing toward the prevailing breezes. One gets a breeze through here, the short face on the front, a little door to the side where you enter the veranda on the ground floor, and then up into the house. They're a plan which Americans call shotgun plan here, coming from a New Orleans plan. But this is typical southern United States architecture here, but Charleston is one of the remaining and few wonderful places in the States where that kind of house remains. We were asked at the edge of town, you can see that it's the edge of town, to make this new museum in a competition which we lost. So another building will get built. But nevertheless, having just finished this and still fresh on my mind, I wanted to show it to you. There is a bus drop-off here, a canopy of wisteria over the whole site on kind of metal trellage or armature, under which about 1,000 cars were required to park. So since everybody will drive here, and there is no parking out here, there's a requirement to fill out the rest of the site with parking, which we did under this canopy. And then beyond the aquarium here, there's a new restaurant and a center for a tour boat, which will take you into the harbor and show you the beginnings of those towns on the southern coast, on the Atlantic coast. And there's a kind of Noli plan of the ground floor coming in. What we have done is appropriated the Charleston house type, two of them together, with the center being a skylight, as you would see over here in the model of an existing pair, coming down into a kind of rainforest in the middle, required by what you call the brief in the plan. Here's the drop-off there at the ground floor. Then there's a fountain, which you can see in my sketch there. The fountain then starts a path of water within the plan, which is the kind of yellow brick road that one takes through the whole sequence, like that light corridor that you saw in the Uffizi, with the colonnaded side from the Charleston model being here on this side. Something called, I don't know whether you have it in the UK, but something we call a view corridor. It's modern parlance by city planners who require that nothing can be built here in the plan. So you divide plans that way, but it allows anybody driving their Ford along here to see out to the water, which I suppose is a pretty good thing. So we made these lighthouses at the end for the tour boat drop-off facility to establish and terminate that view corridor where an old battleship is out here in the water everybody wants to see. There it is from the other side, and there's the long side now of the Charleston house type. And these things are immense in their line, and where several families would live along that line and gain access on the first floor and then sit out on the veranda on the second floor. But I thought it was a non-threatening way to establish the building on this site, and where the views from that porch are so enormously engaging across the bay here, that I thought it was natural for people to come here on, let's say, a Sunday and simply walk out on the porch and take a rest. Here it is from the other end, from the water side, and there's an elevation of the place you buy your ticket and get onto the boat at that end. The next project is in another part of the country, in the Midwest, and not as pleasant, perhaps, as Charleston, South Carolina. This is in the steel belt of America, and this is a little town called Youngstown, Ohio. It became the focus of beach poetry in the 60s, and late 50s. These are the beginnings of certainly not steel mills, but the Industrial Revolution, both in Europe and America. And these are the kinds of forms that one starts to understand relative to this belt of our part of the world, at least. And the job was to make a museum to industry, as it were. It's almost an ethnic museum in that Middle Europeans came to America and then migrated to places like Pittsburgh and Youngstown and Cleveland and other places where they established steel mills, coal mills, and so on. And now all the steel mills in Youngstown have died, as the Japanese have taken that from our shores at least, and do it better and more efficiently and cheaper and so on. And it saves, I suppose, taking the steel to Tokyo before it comes back in the form of an automobile. So it's just one way now. But I thought it important to show our clients, who are is the Ohio Historical Society, the kind of forms that start both here and in the United States in these kinds of configurations that architects are often fascinated with. But here's the brick element that one finds certainly in places like Youngstown, and of course these curious, almost anamorphic-like forms that are built of steel. And then we started to paint that landscape as Charles Damus did in the 30s, and Sheeler did as well in the 20s and 30s in the United States, as we made a lot of that kind of landscape and started to see in these chambers the kind of thing that I suppose Le Corbusier saw them in towards the new architecture. But the industrial landscape became important to us as it does to you as you build new banks here. What is left of Youngstown looks like this in the hinterlands, out in the edge of the town. In town, it looks like any Midwestern American city, and has changed its economic base. But you see how incredibly engaging and quite wonderful in the industrial sense these buildings are, as well as even the kind of steel that was used for these fellows over here on the left. But now it's rusting away, and before they're demolished, the good fathers of Youngstown thought it was important for their kids and grandchildren to know why the town was founded and who they were and why the town is what it is and why their names are so curious. So downtown Youngstown is here. The university is up here, except for one intrusion, which is the local Catholic church called St. Columba. And then a swath of the town had always been vacant ever since the railroad, which came from Cleveland through Youngstown on to Cincinnati, I suppose, was eliminated. So the tracks have left, and now that becomes a new site for buildings such as our Industrial Museum, which is here. And that will become the new spirit of the town, I suppose, the connection between downtown and the university through the former rail yards, which looked like that stuff down there, now become the concert hall and all of those kinds of things. Here is, maybe this is good. Could you focus that guy on the left? Good. Here's the building as it presents its rather genteel front to St. Columba, which is built out of something we call Casota stone, which is mined in Minnesota. And so all of this is university property up here, and this building does become a kind of connection of up a hill, low part here, high part there, a turnaround for school buses, mainly used for children, school bus drop-off there. And the town has now asked us to make a connection between downtown and uptown through a park on the side that we will design. I'll show you that in a moment. They also have a George Siegel sculpture, which is of a steel worker, which you may have seen. The face of the building here in Casota stone probably will be rendered in stucco, and then red sandstone probably will be rendered in stucco. Added face, front door, and then staff on the ground floor. We're going to go up inside to a skylight there for the library, and stacks and so on. The plan, I'm sorry, I should have shaded these darker, but the front door is up here coming into a first gallery, then into two lecture halls where the little kids get a 20-minute talk on the founding of the steel belt of America and the industrial history of America, and then into the gallery, one first gallery, then another gallery underneath it connected by a stair, and then special galleries along the edge. Upstairs, reading room, another reading room looking out over the court of St. Columba, and stacks on either side. Pretty simple brief. The section looks like this. All had to be on one floor for the galleries there. Front door into that first chamber, or into the classrooms from that first hallway. And then the main flexible gallery upstairs and downstairs, that's where all of the stuff will get changed frequently in terms of what will be shown. Top light, so they could have all of the walls left for exhibition. Could you focus left, please? And then the library up at the top with light coming in. So all the forms are a little strange as we will now go around the building, being surrogates of some of the things that you've seen before. But these become the places for permanent collection of the various parts of the museum that will remain. And they have, for instance, a model, rather wonderful steel model of the interior of one of the steel mills in a miniaturized version. So this goes in this miniaturized barnacle on the side. And then moving around, another one over here, another view of Youngstown. It was difficult because the city fathers, those folks that lived down here, wanted probably the whole thing to look like I Am Pei, and the Historical Society wanted it to look this way. And so they fought, and we did this. And then this little barnacle on the side, which is not current now, it's much bigger. We had to have more stuff down here in the end. And then a stair where one can enter from the side coming up from town, or take that stair down into the second gallery below, which will all be glass block in a steel frame. And then a pergola along here, along the walk coming up. This will be a rose garden along the side, where folks will have lunch here. The next project, another competition, this one in Columbus, Ohio, for Ohio State University. This competition was won by Peter Eisenman, and I think Peter's building will soon be under construction. I know a loading dock was built about a year ago, and Peter got very excited about that. That's always important. It means somebody's going to take it seriously, and obviously loading docks come first in building buildings in our country. The front door of the campus, Ohio State, it's an enormous campus, 40, 50,000 people, and they mostly play football there. They have something called the Oval, which is the collection of late 19th, early 20th century buildings, very much like that one I showed you at Emory, built around the Oval, and then the whole thing goes to pot around the outer edge of the campus. There are two monster theaters, one here and one there, and the site occurs on both sides, that side and that side of these theaters. So our plan, shown here on the right, there's one theater, and there's the other theater there. Our plan wraps one side called 17th Street, which is that line over there, and then an art history library there with a pair of carillons marking the front door to the campus for this is the art history library, did I say that? So we're going to see mostly elevations of that long side, and then the town elevation, which is from the high street, and then the campus elevation, which is over here. And then there is a sculpture court that wraps through these two theaters, as one can make that then the kind of glue between these two pieces. With a rotunda for sculpture there, all of the plan here is devoted to the museum. This side is devoted to teaching, and then an outdoor sculpture garden, as you will see in the thing as it unfolds. There's the sculpture garden. Now we've turned on the side, so-called 17th Street entry. Top light for the rotunda below, top light for the permanent collection here. Smaller galleries on the side, again top light in the clear story there. And then that face with an alabaster easel window faces out on the high street out there to indicate the kind of face of the building, the use of the building, and get wonderful, I think, wonderful light coming back into the gallery. The campus side is seen here, where the brief actually called for a window where students could walk up to the window and watch the artist in residence at work. So we had to make this sort of voyeur window, which is here. You can imagine that the first thing the artist in residence would do is put a drape over it. So, but the administration didn't understand, so we did it. And here's the sculpture court, and there's that glue between the two theaters and between our project and the new art history faculty with the roof terrace overlooking then the oval, which is a pretty nice lawn. The portion of the plan here from 17th, the entrance, side galleries here, rotunda, center gallery, smaller galleries on either side, flexible gallery out here at the edge. That's where the alabaster window was, and there's the artist in residence studio with student studios and faculty along the side here, and the elevation of that face. Peter's building doesn't look like this. It's very abstract. There are the pair of carillons here. I think I've gained some points there. Those were to be rung if Ohio State ever beat Michigan again. So as Americans in the audience know what that means. Very serious stuff. The next project is a project that was started 18 years ago in Newark, New Jersey, before it was set on fire in the 60s. And then it was set on fire. And it is now just coming back from the ashes and renovating itself. The city gave this building 2 years ago to the Newark Museum, which is this neo-modern classical building sitting between that original Rutgers University and City of Newark YWCA building there, and a house built for the Ballantyne family. It's like they're equal, I suppose, to the Guinness family here, without the recent politics. But the Ballantyne house was a marvelous Victorian house that stretched back there, and in part was torn down and a new office building built all along that side. This is the Ballantyne house. That's the original Newark Museum built in 1930. When this little Florentine number was built, I'm not quite sure. Just before this, I think. But now the problem is that we must link all of these buildings internally as if they were all built at the same time, except for the Ballantyne house, which has now been fitted out in its proper Victorian dress, as all of the period rooms have been brought back and become part of the Newark Museum. Then this office building back here, and back to the Uffizi, has also been appropriated by the Newark Museum. So the complex is first this Rutgers YWCA over here, then the 1930s neoclassical job, and then the Ballantyne house and this whole line on that side. That center court, again, like that I didn't do, of course, but the top lit from up here provides the kind of centrality that plan of these many parts needs, so that you do know where you are, and especially if you're a school child coming to this for the first time. If you're an adult, you will probably come through the front door for some opening or something like that. If you're a school child, you will come through the side door where a bus parking lot has been established over here, and in to hear a lecture about all kinds of things, and then into the museum. So I'm going to take you through a little addition that we did over here for a front door, and then there's another garden door we did back there, but the rest of it is all an inside job here, all replanned throughout the museum. Now under construction, and will be finished, I think, in about 6 or 8 months. But I wanted to reinforce the idea of the importance of that path that one takes to these kinds of galleries where one's way can be easily lost. But here is the plan of the Brooklyn Museum again. This much was built. That facade and that court were built. This is what was unbuilt, and it would have been enormous. That guy right there is very, very big. It's about the size of the Pantheon right there, so you can imagine what that was. So Isasaki's new museum fits on this back side of the whole gallery. This is the side door. Here, a bus drop-off, big yellow school bus drops off here, children come in there. Skylit hall or gallery there, which shows 19th century sculpture. Then there's a big parking lot owned by the city, and the new ticket booth there. I get very exciting jobs. You can see doors and ticket booths and things like that. And then a section coming in here, peeling off to the lecture hall there, and then up the stairs into more galleries up above, skylit, that you might have seen in this little building added to that place there. Over a couple of drawings of the auditorium. And then back here on the Uffizi side, the office renovation, this little rotunda, which is seen here. Sorry that's so vague. And then little galleries along here for their Oriental collection, which is really spectacular. We're going to see this connection now through here, and then this is like a building dropped into the whole organization. This is around the back side here, almost like a cryptoporticus. There was more found than designed by me, except for punching through our little lunette windows, and then the 19th century sculpture court, which is seen here on the side. Brooklyn again on the right. Then the back entry here to the back of the building. You can see the building is pretty undistinguished back here as additions were made, always meant to be faced in Indiana limestone, but never was. All of this is, I'm sure, Redland brick. I'm going to try to go back with this. If maybe you can make it go back, because there are 4 buttons here and I'm sure to get it wrong. This is the carriage house for the Ballantyne house. So all of this was Ballantyne house and garden through there before they built that. That will become at some point a little restaurant that the museum will renovate. I said this project is 18 years old. We started inside 18 years ago, and then David Dunster and I did a book for Andreas Papadakis a number of years ago, where this scheme was shown with more building all around that edge of that courtyard. But this is a different time. Now the last project will be the Whitney Museum. Have I gone over time? No? Okay? Okay. Now I show you here a series of galleries in the Vatican here on the left. Pope Clement called the Pio Clemento galleries. And as you see, they are a kind of knit together bunch of things that retain their understanding and legibility by virtue of their interior organization, the way they fit the rather curious other parts of the Vatican, where that let's take as orthogonal along the garden here, and then the way the road has distorted the whole plan out at that edge, the way the interstitial space has been made by Pochet, and the form of these figures coming together with the Pochet, then allowing stairs here and there. And there is an understanding in that kind of planning, certainly, that lots of things are possible, and distortions caused by curious plans and city grids and so on can actually be a blessing to some of those earlier plans by Durand and Norman and others that we've seen, even the McKim, Mead, and White plan of the Brooklyn Museum, with this kind of distortion, starts to allow these curious spaces that end up in places like Pope Clement's galleries being virtues. And then Strawberry Hill on the right, certainly not a gallery, but one sees that same kind of identity within each of the rooms, and then clipped on one to the other, though there is not that sense of singularity that one found in those more plasticized plans. One sees here the architect's ability to see each of the fragments of the plan, then hook to the next, and you can see that all the way through Laterri, for instance, where the plans in Rome have been sectioned together to make an understandable unit out of the whole thing, but getting part of its life from the difficulties of the context. I set that up that way because certainly in the Whitney Museum exercise that we've been going through for some time now, some of those issues of adding on to buildings and adding on to buildings that are already valued by the society or a portion of the society in one way or another become, in our time, very difficult because we've gone through a period of time in modernism, and certainly at the time when Marcel Breuer built the Whitney Museum, which is here in 1966, a time when we thought of monuments, cultural monuments like the Whitney, as objects within the city. They were singular, they were on their own turf, they were exposed in a way that the rest of the street had never been understood. The street was made of an accumulation of city building and an accumulation of building upon building and around building and in building, but that's not the way I think Breuer saw his context, and certainly not the way a lot of modernism, but international style modernism, I suppose, saw itself. Breuer felt so strongly about this isolation on his side that he built a concrete wall here. Those of you who've been to Madison Avenue between 74th and 75th have seen that curious wall. What you may not know, and there's that wall here in his plan, there is another one over there. And in a Time magazine interview at that point in history, Breuer, when asked why he built these concrete walls adjacent to his building, he said that the context was mediocre and he wanted to keep it out. Now, if Breuer were alive today and interviewed for his building, he would never say that. Times have changed, sensibilities have changed, and certainly if he felt that way, he'd probably be politic enough not to say it. Now, come this July, I will have worked on this project for 6 years, and we haven't built anything yet. A year and a half ago, I presented the first scheme after working with the staff, the building committee, the board of trustees of the Whitney to establish what you call a brief, we call a program for the entire undertaking. The project started to get its share of, I suppose, press and comment from the moment I was selected as the architect. There was an interview process where a number of architects were interviewed, the list narrowed from 20 to 12 to 3 to 1. And when I was announced as the architect, the opposition forces started to mobilize. Now, it's hard to understand, I think, for some of you who don't come from New York and come from the beginnings of some of the people that value Breuer's building in a way that is certainly not objective. Breuer built his building, finished his building in '66, but before that time, of course, he had been a teacher at Harvard for a number of years and then had moved to New York and had built very few buildings in New York, this in and around the city and the state. This is the only one in Manhattan. And he was a person who many people feel very affectionate toward, I think through his teaching and what he meant to first the Bauhaus and then coming to America, working for Gropius at Harvard, teaching a whole range of people who are now about 65, 70 years old and are still practicing in New York. Breuer himself is dead, but his wife lives. And she speaks to him daily about my addition, and it's not favorable. I've had my parents go talk to him, but they're not architects, so it's tough. Anyway, to say that this project has been volatile doesn't touch it. It has been more written about than even the Portland building, which I thought was a problem only because it was in the northeast part of the United States, and people are a little more conservative there. Little did I know. But the site, I'll get on to that in a moment, but some of the controversy, because I do think it's kind of interesting to look at that in terms of what we're all trying to do today in the city. And you've had your share of it in recent additions to various places and museums here. The original Breuer building is here. And it is set back from Madison Avenue, this being Madison Avenue, a truly great shopping street in America, 74th Street, which is a residential street, 75th Street, the same, except for the Avenue buildings. In New York, what has happened over the long period of time is that the institutions and commercial side of the city gets built on the avenues here, going up north and south, and east and west, the streets, as against the avenues, are generally residential. And there are the brownstones all along the street as you see them there. That pattern has essentially replaced the pattern that saw New York, almost all New York, as brownstones at one time, where those brownstones came back around and wrapped corners. The Whitney started out in the 20s and 30s by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, as she was a rich lady in New York who became the kind of godmother to, or dead mother to a lot of struggling artists, and would help a lot of people by buying their paintings. She first decorated her entire house. She was a painter herself. She lived down on 8th Street, and that's where the kind of center was in the village at that time. And that building still exists today, quite wonderful building. Then they moved up to the back door of the Museum of Modern Art on 54th Street. And then in '66, Breuer finished this third building that the Whitney had been in. And at that point, the board became a public institution. This had been a family affair up to that time, being supported by the Vanderbilts, the Whitneys, the Mellons, and others. But no longer was that sufficient, because it was then a private affair, and now it was public because it was now called the Whitney Museum of American Art. So what this museum shows is American art from the turn of the century to the present day. Every 2 years, the Whitney has something called the biennial, which is a roundly criticized show which shows painting of the moment. And so stodgy types really hate it, and modernists really hate it, and all the painters who were left out really hate it, because it is so all-inclusive that one finally wonders. But it shows all the trends of everything that's happening. So that's, in fact, going on at this very moment. The building that Breuer built stands away from Madison Avenue and is pushed back here as you see it. Now, if you were the architect, just for a moment, of the addition to the Whitney Museum, and you had to build half again as much to the Whitney, you know that you would have to build the rest of the block at least. This is not zoned for institutional use, so I can't build there. The Whitney owns this property and has always owned this property. They bought, in fact, a hole in the ground. The developer went bust, and they bought that hole, and at the same time bought these brownstones, or as we like to say now, as we're trying to tear them down, tenements, here along the side. Well, you'll see them in a minute, they're marvelous. But of course, that is another issue in New York, because we have destroyed the city, not by buildings like this, but the developers have done a real job on New York. There is a mood now to save everything of age. No, not necessarily quality, just age. Breuer stepped his building back, as you see here, made this this reverse ziggurat that you get from the northwest corner, looking back to the concrete wall. This is looking south. And no longer would that be possible in the new zoning ordinances of New York. So as you're sitting there being the architect for the Whitney Museum, don't think for a moment that you could simply extend his building as if it were an extrusion along that side. You would now have to build a building, or get to build a building, along the face of the sidewalk and then the street here. So your building would have to do exactly what the brownstones did. Those were in fact stoops at one point, that second line there. Those have long since disappeared, and the buildings have been cut back to that next line. But now the requirement is that you build here, primarily because the American developer and the American architect had destroyed 3rd Avenue, 6th Avenue, some of Park Avenue, a good deal of those streets in New York by building imitation Seagram buildings on the middle of open, what they call plazas. And so they could make the buildings higher and more singular, and made boxes, as you know, reflective glass boxes, in open terraces, unpleasant, wind-blown places. That setting the building back allowed them to build taller, but it destroyed the street, destroyed the commerce, and for Mayor Koch, destroyed the tax base of New York. Very, very important. So don't think of it's all aesthetic, where it's very pleasant to have buildings up here so you can shop in the windows. Not at all. But our requirement is now to build to that street face. Another requirement was to keep the front door of the museum here. Even though we were going to build out the rest of the site, the front door couldn't move to the middle of the site, or couldn't move, heaven forbid, to my side. And there's the front door of the Whitney. So all of this becomes front door, obviously, all of that cut back reverse ziggurat. Now, our first scheme showed a block here. We'll see a picture of it in a minute. A block there. Breuer's building here, of course. A third building up through the center of the two, acting as a link between the two halves. I'll tell you why in a moment. And then a piece at the top, which was deemed too large by people who lived on 74th Street, and on one hand, because it would block their light, and they were right, and then by Breuer's students and lovers of Breuer building, who thought my touching Breuer was about the worst thing that could happen to anybody. But my leaning on him there had to be the worst that they could ever imagine. The original building is that darker dotted line at the top. The new building is here. I'm going to show you both. Vincent Scully, an historian from Yale, who doesn't like the Breuer's building, who came rushing to my support and was booed roundly, said finally that great stone of Breuer's has something to support, but people see it in different ways. There is the site, Breuer's building here. There's already an addition of a floor and a half on top of Breuer's building for mechanical services. There are the tenements down at the base of the building here. These are the residential streets there, and there is Park Avenue back there, and you see the taller turn-of-the-century residential quarters there, building up Park Avenue in that great cavernous street that it is. Our site could be sketched the way I have here on the right. In very simplistic terms, 75th Street, 74th Street, the center of the composition, either in plan or in elevation, but taking it in elevation for a moment, the pressure put on that concrete wall, now that thing in between, what I didn't say is that this is 200 feet, and that concrete wall is exactly 100 feet across the site. New York blocks are 200 by 800 generally, except where Broadway slashes through the city. So the kind of diptych of the composition, the two panels of these two sides that one would understand, dividing, if you will, the site, became an issue, for me at least, knowing that the front door was going to remain here, and that block had to be built to the height of Breuer's building before any setbacks would take place. So the composition had to be exactly the same height as Breuer's, and then tracing out the rest of that line. Now, we have a curious law in New York called the FAR, the floor area ratio. And it is determined by the amount of coverage of the site that you can have. And what developers do is go along and find institutions like this that will never build any longer and buy all of that air from them. And they buy the air so that they can then cover more of the site higher, you see. And so, since this is all the Whitney Museum, we didn't have to buy it from anybody, but this is the allowable bulk on the site, which you see there, which nobody in this audience would build, obviously. It wouldn't make a very good museum. And we're not here in this program, like the Museum of Modern Art, to build a residential tower, for instance, or an office tower for income for the museum. This is only for museum use, this new building. There's another law in New York called Sky Exposure Plane Requirement, which would take that bulk, allowable bulk, and turn it into this, which is this step-back pyramidal-shaped ziggurat as you see it. And that, too, wouldn't make a very good museum. I suppose the director's office could be there, and the boardroom could be there, and a couple of offices there, but not much of a gallery. So those are two of the requirements of zoning in New York that this building comes under. So again, thinking of yourself as the architect, remember those two diagrams. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that you can take that sky exposure plane diagram and turn it over horizontally across the two buildings, make a lot better museum in terms of contiguous space, left to right or north to south, and make a lot lower building by doing so. So building across the Breuer building was something that we assumed from the outset. Okay. The slide on the right was the drawing that was finally presented. I won't show you a lot of preliminaries, which are equally as good. But I do show you this one because the glue between the two sides becomes this cylinder, which is now here, making the diptych, a triptych, if you will, between the north side, the existing museum, our new face here, and a series of galleries and special rooms that run up through the museum and allow both sides to connect to a third element, more neutral, I suppose, because of its position. I also built that center knuckle over onto Breuer here and tucked it under the overhangs of Breuer so that on both sides it would more fully engage Breuer's space and Breuer's form as his reverse ziggurat occurs there, and also to make our building respond to Breuer's building in a more literal way. The local architects, very few of them, 600, signed a petition against that move and others. And so, being a realist, that's gone. Then there is a requirement by the City of New York that you must return the face of a new building to its existing character. And in this case, it is a commercial characteristic that they're interested in. So the ground floor of a new addition becomes shops and stores, which is, in fact, the general character of the Upper East Side along Madison Avenue. And then there is this north-facing eye of Breuer, big window there in his fourth floor. On our fourth floor, I had made an alabaster window, not unlike that one at Ohio State that I used, to get light, ambient light into the sculpture floor. Then there were offices here at that time, and then more gallery. This was because there was something called a structural transfer floor here to support Breuer's big spaces in there. And it was a low ceiling, and we couldn't use it for galleries. And then building up, all of these were galleries. That was a big eyebrow window, which gave a good view to Central Park out to the west, and had a stair just behind it that connected these galleries as you started to leave this knuckle in between. The top, offices, library, and restaurant with mechanical services up here. The plan of the original building, the original scheme is here. Breuer's plan there. Those of you who've been to the Whitney know that there's a big service elevator that people take, as well as paintings, and that becomes a kind of identifying mark of the Whitney. A stair that Breuer built, which is greatly loved by many in New York. It's very medieval in here. It's wonderfully dark. I wouldn't normally say that, but it is. It has a character which is, I think, it'll all get changed, but in the press, but hard to achieve. The existing lobby is here, an expanded museum shop, which we would do, and a new coat room in something they call the lobby gallery, a place where, while you're waiting for friends, you have something to do. That has been moved out to the knuckle out here on the street. There is a new lobby here and a new entry on 74th Street, mostly for night activities that take place 1 level, 2 levels below ground in a new theater, which is to be built. A stair down to it here, a stair up to the 2nd floor there, and that 74th Street entry so that they can close this off and keep the museum secure at night. So you're only coming into here and then down. Elevators there, which would only go down again. So we moved the elevators, the staff elevator and so on, around the corner, and then these are the shops and stores. The new plan, well, first of all, now, this plan and that scheme that you just saw on the right-hand side we presented, as I say, about 1.5 years ago, and it really did hit the fan. I mean, I have never seen anything like it in my life, and I realized how thin my skin was. As two of the signers of the petition, I.M. Pei and a man called Slow Eddie Barnes, who had built, Ed Barnes built the IBM building in New York. You may know it. It's the one that stands just 1 block north of Phil Johnson's AT&T building, were really vigorous in their opposition, to say the least. I got annoyed, started saying things, and it got very rough for a while. But it was clear that in this time in New York, where too much building is going on and too many museums have added too much space, I suppose, we were trying to add 30,000 square feet of gallery space. That is equal to the combined bookstores of the Metropolitan Museum. So, I mean, it's all relative, adding to museums. The Metropolitan will add, I think in the next 5 years, their last edition that they're allowed, which will bring them up to 2 million square feet in Central Park. This altogether is about 150,000 square feet. So it's a different kind of place. Now, the significant parts of the change occur in this way. I'll be very quick about this. First of all, we eliminated the 74th Street entrance. I was trying to make, now, after the building was presented, we never took it to the Landmarks Commission. I should say that in 1968, the landmarks legislation was established in the city of New York, primarily because the architect of the Whitney Museum, Marcel Breuer, wanted to tear down Grand Central Station, which is a Stamford White building and much revered in the city. And they didn't do that. They built above it, as you know. He and Gropius and others. So the landmarks legislation was established to keep architects and developers from tearing down the city. And then 1987, 30 years later, 20 years later, quick, Michael, it was a long trip. The city now has established in the Upper East Side zoning district, the whole district has been landmarked. So whether a building was built yesterday or whether it was built in the last century or 2 centuries ago, it doesn't matter. The Upper East Side zoning district starts about about 60th Street and goes up to 79th Street and from 5th Avenue over to Park. So that whole district in New York, or that part of the grid, has been landmarked. Even though Breuer's building itself is not old enough, it has to be 30, 35 years old, I think, to be landmarked in New York. We're a very rapid society. The district is, so the effect is the same. We need to go to 5 different commissions for approvals for this building, and we haven't gotten through the first one yet, so it's only been 6 years so far. But on the 19th of this month, we start with landmarks, then we go to the community boards, which are a lot of rabble-rousing people who live around who don't love what we're doing. They wouldn't love anything anybody would do. It doesn't matter whether it's Michael Graves or Michelangelo. Never mind. In a part, they're right, because as I was trying to nap this afternoon at Blake's Hotel, you're building something behind Blake's, and the woman at the desk said, it'll be very quiet, it's on a back street. But those jackhammers that were going while I was napping would be going here for a year and a half, and one is sympathetic to a point. Now, what I did, besides take square footage out of every part of the new addition except the galleries, we left the galleries intact and eliminated 30,000 square feet of the rest of the plan, from offices to library to auditorium to restaurant, all of that, and things like this space, all gone. That space, for instance, becomes that space, okay? So the economies in the plan that perhaps, as some have said, should have been there in the first place, and they may be right, have disappeared. This becomes the lobby gallery now. That becomes a stair down to the theater, 1 level below, and then the commercial, which was on 2 levels, is now on 1 level and expanded over that former entry. All of those kinds of economies in the plan have taken place. But more importantly, on the residential face of our building, not Breuer's, but our building, I had established the elevators here so that the galleries up above could have this clear horizontal expanse, as Breuer's building now at the upper levels comes back out to Madison Avenue, as you saw in plan, or in 3 dimensions. And I wanted to keep all of that clear so that they could use that as continuous space. And so did the staff and director. But we got so much static from the community on the sheer wall that the elevators made, because they need to be a full floor above any floor of the gallery, that even though it makes good exhibition space, it makes a building unbuilt. So I moved the elevators into the heart of the building here, where now the elevator overrun won't now impinge on 74th Street, because it will be back in the middle of our composition, which is here. And then I tried to make the whole thing work as a big figure 8 around a new small gallery there. Now here's Breuer's wall, and here's the suddenly loved brownstones here and here. There is one member of the Landmarks Commission who wants me to keep the 3rd floor windows. He finds them particularly attractive. And he said, you couldn't you? And I said, I'm afraid if I did, you'd like it. I could imagine those 3rd floor windows sort of pasted on, over here. But all the stoops are gone, all the porticos are gone, all the colonnades are gone, all of that's remodeled here already for these shops and stores. The shops and stores stay, but we do want to remove the tenements. And there's the plan again showing that section. Now looking at 2 of my plans, well, this is Breuer's side, and you see 2 existing columns, which obviously stay. And that's the temporary exhibit space that he built, which works very well for a changing gallery. The Whitney, from its founding, has acted as a kind of Kunsthalle, but changing gallery here and there. This is the 3rd floor, this is the 4th floor, the 2 main galleries of the Whitney as it stands now. They show of their permanent collection, less than 1% of their permanent collection. They own 2,000 Edward Hopper paintings and drawings. They show 2 of them. And so the space is needed if you like American art of this century. And this is the repository for that kind of art. We are asked to make the permanent collection, while Breuer's space will still be used as changing galleries for something like the Biennale, for instance, that's going on now. So where you see our rooms as smaller, this is just a mock-up plan. All of these walls can be moved at will. Our columns are here and here. But the core obviously stays, but all of that space could be changed in any configuration you'd want to make it look like the east wing, I&K, if you like. Then the fourth floor shows the sculpture floor here. There's the alabaster window that remains, but in a different form throughout the whole of the space. Here's a comparative section of the first scheme. There is that shear wall crawling up the back side to the elevator penthouse, which is there. There's the theater 3 levels below ground, 2 of itself, and then a commercial zone. All of that has been lifted up, less jackhammering, less square footage, smaller building. We've clipped all of that off. We got roasted royally for having the restaurant at the top. It's come back down to the basement where it is now. It's really a pleasant place. Breuer built a moat around his building to keep everybody out, but that's what the restaurant looks out to. He really did remove the building from the city, which becomes the current argument in the press. There's the stair that went out looked out that eyebrow window, which half the people loved and half the people hated it. One trustee said that she would only give money for the building if they would name the eyebrow window after her. But other people thought it was the worst thing that I could have done. So there's the comparative height of the building, 3 floors lower, though the press says 2. The elevators are now back in here, except for the existing service elevator, which is back in the Breuer side. Comparative floors. Now, there's the shear wall that caused so much trouble on backside of 74th Street. There's the big galleries that occurred in the required setbacks. That's our base building, Breuer's base building. There are Breuer gardens out here behind a reinforced concrete wall, which is there. Another very pleasant place. And then that's faced with black granite on the outside. He's a very dour man. But our elevators remain there. That's that service elevator, and then a staff elevator takes you up to the top floors. But there you see the effect of that decision of moving the elevator. There is the comparison of old and new again with our new model. I was told by the trustees never to show the front elevation again because you'd never see it that way. This is in fact how you do see the building here, but you can't compose from this alone. So there's the front elevation. And there's the old building, and you will admit that it's a lot, and I will as well. The new building is about this height now, 47 feet lower, 20 feet back on the east side, that 74th Street side, which is good. No more touchy-feely over here to Breuer. That's shear wall up the side. Another alabaster window here, reconfigured to the Breuer's window now right side up. The brownstones have returned in their surrogate form as you see them here, and with their commercial base. I hope that I don't have to put the third floor windows in here. These are obviously in part cosmetic to tie into Breuer's overhang, and using Breuer stone as a shadow here for what would have been in the brownstone palazzo type of the side streets. Those ones that I showed you were built by a developer in 1880. But the better ones have the piano nobile window, which would be here in that organization. And then the gallery continues up to the top, a members lounge there, which has the value of that old window. Now, I'm not looking at the park, but allowing you to orient up and down the avenue. And then 2 floors of offices here and mechanical services at the top. There's a comparison of the 2 models, before and after. Well, before and now. This is only scheme 2. And I have great stick-to-itiveness. Though the director says if this one doesn't fly, he will quit. But the director is a man by the name of Tom Armstrong, quite wonderful man, and the board and the director and the staff are really great to work with. We've had a very good time. I hope it goes on. I hope all of this does get built, but I've had a marvelous time with them, and they have given me nothing but support. It's been terrific. Because they've been battered around a lot. You can imagine a trustee who collects art but does not, knows little about architecture, did not select me, probably lives in a modern house somewhere in Long Island, being buffeted at a cocktail party about all of this for 6 years, and coming out strong every time. So that's really been quite rewarding that they've done that. The building is made of red agate granite. This is black or gray granite of Breuer's. You might think that I should have built mine of gray granite as well. For two reasons, I did not. I thought it would trivialize Breuer's proportions to do that. In other words, you would see gray to gray. And again, in a physical or cosmetic way, that might have been a good decision. But in terms of the objecthood of Breuer's building, I wanted it to remain as you see it, as an object, still building our block fill-out on the southern side. If you squint your eyes, you will see, I hope, that the two buildings are of the same value, color value, however. And this red, as you will see in a context slide in a moment, most of the street is made of red brick, and this job here is white glazed brick, which you get in some of the light gray granite at the top. And then, of course, the brownstones of the side streets seen in the surrogate face. There, a darker red agate that I've used. The early one, and there's that sheer wall that caused so much trouble along the eastern side. The shop faces there. Moving the elevators actually helped the side more than this front. It had a greater impact on it, at least. As you see, the old center of the building, as you moved up around the elevators, now is here, and that is allowed me to cut this back side back here to a roof terrace for the director's office here, and make it like the other roof terraces that one finds on Park Avenue and so on. So that is really a part of New York, as people try to grab as much roof space as possible because it's such a dreadful place to live. But here's the offices up here. There are 2 levels of offices, and the shop fronts along there. And then you see the brownstones, which are individually seen on the side street, now split apart, making their identity more singular on that face, that southern face. There it is again, comparison of the two models. And there's the 47 feet that have been removed, that amount here. The community board wanted us to take 25 feet at minimum off the building. There's the back side, and you can see the effect of this building, where all of these buildings on the avenues are this high, but nevertheless, against these little fellows, it does become a pretty gruesome task. There's the Breuer building, which is actually up at this height here, with its mechanical services, which we have incorporated into our building. But the new building shows then symmetrical terraces here, and because the shadow, it doesn't show here, but that is cut back then another 20 feet for a terrace there like that one. There's the service elevator coming up in that little knuckle there. And there's the existing context. There's white brick and Indiana limestone. This is the Carlisle Hotel. That's the gray granite face, and that's the concrete wall that you're not very aware of unless you're taking a picture like this. The brownstones, which are often faced in brick on the sides, then more brownstones and brick faces on the side streets. That's that character. And this is Madison Avenue, generally, not this, by the way. I'd be all for saving these buildings if it were somebody else's scheme. Just kidding. There's the Carlisle again, which is obviously the tallest building in the neighborhood. And our building in context. This is the new scheme. This is the new scheme here. And then finally these two slides which show the building in the street, collaged in the street as if it were built. And you see how much you see from the southern side first, looking north. Our building is here, comes out like the brownstones do now, out to the face, and then that part that is tucked back 20 feet from the face of the building, which is here as well. And then from the north looking south, Breuer's ziggurat there, making that deep, deep shadow on Madison Avenue, and then our building coming out to the face, and the surrogate brownstones there. Simply to conclude, I would only say, and I'm sorry I talked so long, but I would only conclude by saying that when designing the Whitney, thought it was a wonderful challenge because obviously Breuer's building is very hard to add to in terms of the object nature of it. But the kind of projects I give my students, which are usually to add on to buildings of some age, and usually Beaux-Arts buildings, it's a very different kind of attitude toward planning and the adaptation of new to old and so on than we have in adding to a modern monument. I didn't know it was going to be so politically volatile, this whole exercise, but at the same time, I would quickly do it again, as any of you would, I think. But I would quickly ask all of my detractors in New York if they were offered the commission, would they turn it down? And you have to know that most of those that are so active, like Pei and Barnes, were considered for the job. There are other people like Raoul Darmas, who runs SOM New York, Skidmore's and Merrill, the largest architects in the country, and Raoul Darmas was interviewed, but he has been a staunch supporter. I mean, there's another way of thinking about all of this. When you lose the job, you don't try to censor the architect that gets it. It seems to me very, very bad behavior. But as I was saying to some people beforehand, I was really stung by the criticism from my colleagues. And thinking back and sort of pot and kettles calling each other black, I was thinking of the John Hancock Tower in Boston that I and Pei built, where you may remember, you may not know, that most of the glass popped out and fell to the ground because the tower was a sheer reflective abstraction next to Henry Hobson Richardson's great church as a kind of stepping stone to this town. And given that Pei is a very frugal man, I'm sure, he, I suspect, gathered all the shards from the ground and carried them in a basket to Paris and the courtyard of the Louvre, has now reused all of that, or is about to. And thinking about that project as against this one, it just seems chicken feed. But nevertheless, that's what's happening in today's world of backbiting and criticism. But in terms of what's happening today in architecture, you all know that, I think, that cities are made in a way that some modernists didn't think they were made. And cities are in fact made the way this one is and the way that one is, with you building onto me and me building onto you, and monuments are made and changed and adapted and converted, and nothing would give me greater pleasure than for the Whitney to add on, because it's so successful with this edition and with their collection and their program for conserving and establishing new collections, that they were to add again. They probably won't, because they have used up the allowable space, well, not to the height, but they have used up what the zoning allows them to do today, so another program will be instituted there. And the nice thing about the Whitney with the new edition is, in terms of a museum experience, you can just about do it in a day, the day's visit. Unlike the Met, where you clearly, before going, set out to see one section of the Metropolitan Museum, one section of the gallery, rather than trying to do the whole thing. It would take weeks. So this is a very reasonably sized building, which will allow them now to show only 5% of their permanent collection. So they aren't asking for all that much. But really, to say that one should not build on top of Breuer, you see the effect of it, and you can like it or dislike it, but Breuer, I think, is still intact. Certainly the object nature of Breuer is intact. And the Whitney institution is intact, as it needs and will show the rest of its collection somewhere. I hope it's on this site. Otherwise, they will have to sell the existing museum and build somewhere else in the city. But this part of New York, and Upper East Side Historic District, is partly known for this institution, which is so easy as you walk or shop on the weekend to peel off and walk into the Whitney and see one floor of it. It is a marvelous place for that kind of Saturday afternoon undertaking. You don't have to set out to go to the Whitney, and this location, therefore, becomes essential to the city. And I think the adding of this collection, this permanent collection to this building in this way also is essential. Thank you very much.
Take questions, or you too tired?
No, I'm fine.
No time. I have to wind up by saying
I've done it again. There's no time for questions.
I'm afraid there's no time for questions. Before closing the meeting, though, I would like to remind the audience that next Tuesday on the 12th of May, Massimo and Lila Vignelli, also from New York, will give the AGB RIBA lecture on interior design. And that, who is this? Oh yeah, Terry Farrell will speak on the 19th of May on Terry Farrell in the context of London, if he hasn't redesigned it completely by that time. It falls to me finally to once again reiterate my thanks to David Pierce for the initial idea, to Redland Brick, Redland Tile for the sponsorship of this lecture, to thank Michael, who has walked off a plane today and had, I should think, in the past 48 hours, about 9 hours sleep, for giving us a lecture in which, as I counted it, there was actually only one built building, but one felt that one was in the presence of real architecture. Michael Graves, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.